Hey everybody, Mr. Hauger here. I hope you're doing really well. I know these weeks have been a bit challenging. Thanks for all your patience and flexibility, but I have the feeling that I need to teach. So here I am in my home studio, and I'm going to be walking you through some of the keynotes and concepts from this lesson, which is Modern World Independence Movements. In your textbook, in TCI, we're talking about section number 32, lesson number 32, sections 1 through 5. And if you're in other schools, then this is going to jump around a little bit in sections, but hopefully will help you understand these concepts. I hope you're doing really well, and that I know that I miss you in class. I miss the feedback, the activities, the journals, the daily writes, the conversations, keeping up with what you're doing and having fun. And in the meantime, we are here. If you have any specific questions, you can write me, and I will respond to you by email. So let's get started. For the first lesson and for what we would have been doing in class, which is just still interesting, I think, to get your thoughts around and to process, we're going to talk about how some modern countries over the last 60 and 70 years got independence and how that's different for each country that must go through the process, and how we as Americans really value democracy. And I want to talk about whether or not that helps or hinders a country when it's established, and we'll look at a few examples as well. If we were in class, here are some of the visuals I would have shown you. I went through a few memes because you guys are all about meme culture, at least some of you are, and this is the first one that came up when I memed freedom, because independence means that you are sovereign, you rule yourself. What does freedom mean? And here's the first image that shows up from Google Images. I'm sorry I can't hear you over my freedom with the bald eagle, which I thought if we were in class I would just pop this image up, say nothing, and wait for someone to respond or raise their hand or say something about it, because it's such a symbol in our country. And such a prideful image, an animal of strength and of independence and of like flying and soaring. All the imagery that comes along with an eagle too is, it's kind of an honorable bird. It's not like we chose a pelican, sorry, New Orleans, or, another animal that maybe doesn't have the meaning that the bald eagle does. The second image that came up was different. It said, if the best things in life are free and freedom isn't free, doesn't that mean there are better things in life than freedom? And I thought that some of you would specifically comment. I'm thinking about you fifth period, thinking about you third period, that you come up with those contrarian points sometimes because you are free thinkers, and that is freedom and that is value in itself. And what does it mean that not everyone thinks that freedom is the same? Or that not everyone agrees that we have the same dimensions of freedom. And if you take just the disagreements that we would have in a classroom and amplify them by 7 billion people in the modern world today, you get to understand how different countries want different things and how they were raised to want different things, and how individuals value their own independence differently and their own individual rights and freedoms differently. And we certainly have a specific take on that in America. The third picture that I came up with is that freedom isn't free for any woman or any girl anywhere. And I was going to have a sub-discussion about what is it like to be a free woman in the United States, and what is it like to be growing up in a society and be female in the world, and does that mean different things in different countries? I love the discussion. It's killing me that you're not here with the feedback for me. But I think these are all interesting warm-ups to get your brain wrapped around the idea of that each country in the world has a different thought process, a different set of values, and a different shared history of what they have done to get and achieve and hold the freedoms that they have. And finally, there are two more. You can see I'm struggling with that auto fade in. No worries, technology, just like in the classroom. Says freedom isn't free, ignores corporate income tax loopholes. I thought that was an interesting conversation to have about, is freedom the same for everyone in every wealth class? Does money allow you to have more freedom than other people? Does the fact that the wealthy have more opportunities, is that something we would agree upon as a class? Is it something you work for? Is it something that you have access to more intelligence, more protections, and more loopholes as your income level rises? And what does that mean for the rest of us in terms of our freedom? It's a great conversation, and I hope we can have it at some point. Maybe we'll do like a Zoom debate. And lastly, as you know I like to do, ending on the serious, bringing home that introductory conversation. This one says, freedom isn't free. It was paid for by the brave souls that gave everything for it. And what I wanted to talk about before we got into the real materials here about Indonesia, Pakistan, Mexico, Poland, and different countries in Africa are that, when we make light of conversations that we sometimes lose sight that people have died in the millions around the world for country sovereignty and for the rights of governments to determine their own futures and their own ways of life. So even though we probably would have had a really good time with all those topics, and rightly so, because developing your own opinion and thought process is huge, we have to acknowledge that anywhere that there is a desire for freedom, there must be protection of those freedoms, and that has often come at the cost of many, many lives. And a lot of your families, judging from your heritage projects that you did, know this firsthand. So let's get into the lesson then. I wanted you to start by giving yourself a score out of 100. And I know that would be followed up with many, many questions. My goal was to try to not answer any. Whatever you think it means, give yourself a score out of 100. Think about that for a second. I'll give myself one. I don't mind talking about myself. If I was analyzing everything I'm doing from where I'm sitting right now, the house I'm living in, my career, which is you, essentially, my thought process about my instruments, my music making, I would give myself an 86. Right? I think I'd be a 95 if I was a touring musician. I'd be a 95 if I was doing more conferences as a teacher. I'd be a 95 if I thought every one of you would leave this room and say that you're really enjoying my instruction. I know that I need to get better. At the same time, I feel like I give myself a pat on the back for doing a lot of things well, but knowing that there's a good 15% improvement I think I can make to get over the top of 100 and to really feel like I was going on all cylinders, but still pretty good. Why did I have you do that? Because around the world, we've decided as historians and analysts to give countries what's called a democracy score. And the Economist intelligence units came up with a 2019 democracy index, and they analyzed 167 countries. And they gave them a score on a scale of 0 to 10. And a 10 would represent a full democracy where you're getting full input as a citizen into nearly everything in your life. And then below that would be flawed democracies, like you get to choose some things, but there's problems in your system. You're not really represented. There's hybrid regimes where they might be mixed. Maybe you get some say. And then there'd be authoritarian regimes where you're getting no say at all. And you're looking at an overview of all of the countries that were surveyed. So the redder it is, the less freedom. The bluer it is, the more freedom. And you'll notice that ours is a darker blue, but it's not the darkest blue. You'll find those in more Norse countries, in Canada and Australia, where they actually get more participation from their civilians. Why would we explore that? Well, we're talking about world independence. And the economies and their politics are generally fairly well linked. Look at this graph, which we're going to be seeing in quite some time. In class, we would have had a very interactive experience for about 45 minutes charting more countries here. But look here. What are the countries that are the most democratic? Well, on this, as far as the democracy score, the U.S. is nearing the top. And so are India, and so are France. Which of these countries have the highest average income? That would be moving to the right as opposed to the left. And again, the United States, France, Russia, even though it is not a complete democracy, has a higher income. Then you have China. Remember, there's over 1 billion people there. So while many people are doing much better than that, there are a lot of people who are doing much worse. And then the lowest income per person in dollars is in India. But they are a very democratic place. So the first test question, and I decided to go away from the hint ticket here so that we could just kind of straight up give you what the test question would have been, is what does this image summarize? And if this is our final, this could be very helpful to review as well. The image summarizes that generally speaking, for these 5 countries, the more democratic a country, the higher the income. But there is the outlier, the exception, which is India. In the introduction to this lesson, South Korea had a tough start as a nation. 2 years after it was established, it went to war with North Korea. During that war, 2.5 million lives were lost, and we spent a good amount of class time talking about the Korean War. After the fighting ended, tensions remained high, and that armistice, that peace, tells you that that war actually never ended. But what does the lesson intro tell you about independence? And ask you to make a conclusion that in a lot of cases, that's why I ended with that last meme that was serious, that there are sacrifices involved. There are costs. There are sometimes a high price to pay. Not every independence, but this one, absolutely. Now, in 92, that was when I was about 5 years old. They had democratic elections in South Korea, and civilians began to participate more in government. The new leaders continued to grow the economy. But there was a financial crisis. And during that setback, it rebounded as it continued to prosper. Another test question. What political factor likely had a large role to play in letting South Korea do this? Should be a question mark at the end of that. Should I do it now and expose the fact that I had a typo? Yeah, why not? Because again, I'm still looking to improve too. Basically, the connection I would make here is that since South Korea had democracy and restored rights to the people, that increased satisfaction for the civilian population, that lets countries recover when a crisis happens. We're sitting here looking at each other on a screen because of distance learning. Our United States economy will recover because of the hard work of the individuals, because of the freedom they go to work, because capitalism rewards them for their work. And though this stock market has really been tumbling, although the last 6 or 7 days, we're almost back to those same highs because optimism remains that the system isn't flawed, but that we're in a moment of challenge. So I would argue that South Korea had a similar event. Now, we won't be able to chart the differences in different countries because you're not with me, and I can't have you interact with me so easily currently in this platform. But look at Indonesia's chart and look at how the country became more democratic from 1968 to 2016, that generally speaking, with only a few exceptions, as we go up in democracy score, we also move to the right as the average income gets higher. And those changes resulted for South Korea in a much quicker way, that these countries that when independence was announced by bringing in the philosophies of some form of capitalism and democracy, that the income per person rises, the motivation rises. Pakistan as well. As the democracy score increases, the participation, the voting rights, the citizen rights, as those things continue to go up, we move to the right and income gets higher. But notice the number changes, that we're still at a very low income per person in Pakistan today. And that's because they had several cycles and there has been uprisings and upheavals, and democracy has fluctuated and the economy has fluctuated. Uncertainty also has fluctuated. So not every country, just by the means of being democratic, becomes a successful economic powerhouse. Mexico follows the trend as well. They were a one-party state for many years, from 50 to 1979. But as the economic system began to grow and develop, we see that the average income rises as well. And it's sitting at about half what the United States is, which kind of gives you an understanding of push and pull factors, that when the United States has jobs that are opening that are, like, to us, sometimes seeming low-income jobs like field work or you could say like childcare or fast food, that those, even full-time jobs, start out above the average median income of Mexico. So when you look at like why capitalistic systems or economic systems matter, because when one does well and it has a neighbor that's not doing well, you're going to see a migration and an influx or a desired influx of people to move to different areas. And isn't this kind of a cool way to look at the conversation? Because you probably already knew that to be true, but this is what's great about studying history, is you can get the data to actually support your opinions and the history to make you sound knowledgeable when you have the conversation. As we continue, now we've added all the countries from this chapter just about, and you look at a country like North Korea, which is among the least democratic in the world and also one of the poorest per capita, meaning per person in dollars. So it doesn't necessarily mean that what we are doing is so right, what they're doing is so wrong, because in different places you've got a number of factors that are mattering. It's never just the economy, right? Even in the modern United States today. Poland was a one-party communist state and had a long road to go before independence, especially as it was heavily damaged in World War II, and the communist system was undermined by the election of the Polish Pope, who attracted popular support. And so there were a lot of different struggles. You can even look at their ups and downs with the dots in the years. 1947, very low democracy score. 89, much higher, but in 80, they had a setback before these late booms that got into the 1990s. And now they're one of the most democratic countries in the world. And again, as stability came and as Poland developed its own system, its economy followed as well. And so Poland ends up between Mexico and the United States, and about halfway between Mexico and France, which is kind of an interesting comparison. Tanzania in Africa is another country that we haven't talked about this year, but it is involved in this lesson. And between 1962 and 1985, Julius Nyerere became president. He had built a socialist state and a one-party system, so think totalitarianism, think dictatorship. And although he allowed some democratic rights, the country's score remained low because there really wasn't a meaningful exchange between people and government. So his policies were a disaster, and that shows on this graph here in 1962, where we're low on score and under $1,000 per person. Now in 2016, meaningful elections began to take place. The ability to take representation in courts and the legal system and own business and operate outside of the government's control. So we start to creep up here above zero on the democracy score, and we've tripled basically since 1985 the amount of money that each person is making. And you can understand that in the context of like the long run of how long countries have been around, that's not very long. So you're still going to see them very far left on the graph here. But it might mean that they are moving in the same direction that these other colored dots have done on our graph. And Ghana as well is another country that we haven't mentioned since the beginning of the year. And they gained independence in 1957. You'll notice that during this Cold War period, when the United States and the USSR were struggling with all of these proxies all over the place and colonies all over, that more and more countries began to say, you know what? We're entering a modern world where we're all globally connected. We should have independence. And they looked at the other successful models. People were seeing stories from around the world and reading history and seeing that success can't happen if you're being controlled or being puppeted. So when Ghana got independence in 1957, the economy began to fail initially because it was an authoritarian controlled nation. There was a coup to seize power in 1966, and there was a cycle of civilian governments for about 10 years until an Air Force officer came in 1879. And through a few more bouts of instability, we began to see people's rights increasing. The age of workers began to change. Families began to survive and thrive at a higher rate. And also they became one of the most educated nations with more people going to college than many other countries in the world. And they are another country that finds themselves in their growth phase. Still income very low, and they're still dealing with a lot of poverty and adversity. But there are more educated people that begin to develop, and they begin to value freedom more and demand freedom more. And so you're seeing the rise on the y-axis here. And so my guess would be that we see the rise of the x-axis moving to the right as well over the next few decades. And with that conversation that we just had, with this data and this history all melded together in this remote distance learning video, I think it's much more interesting and more tied together. Now, your book's got all the hard details and the facts and the dates, but when we take all 6 of these countries and blend them together into one lesson, I think you kind of understand how democracy and income can be tied, but that they are not always tied. So you can also see that since the 1960s, specifically 1961, look how much better and more to the right these countries are faring on the whole than they were before. And that's recapping what we learned. So I hope you enjoyed this remote lesson. I know I enjoyed talking about it because I think it's a really nice middle point between lecture and visuals. And it's one that we haven't spent that much time on graphs and charts, and this lesson is chopped nicely for that analysis. Well, I hope you're doing well, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that you're also taking the time to develop personally. I know I've said it before, but in case you haven't seen the other videos, take the time to learn new skills, watch videos that make you smarter, keep in touch with friends, build yourself to the place you want to be. And until the next time we can talk and the next lesson, this is Mr. Hauger saying be well and class dismissed. Thank you very much for watching.